You know that I can't do that. That's not how our legal system works.
In the hallowed halls of justice, emotions often run high, but in cases involving child predators, anger and outrage can boil over into physical confrontations. Today, we take a look at some of the most shocking attacks and confrontations in courtrooms, where victims' families, loved ones, and even complete strangers take matters into their own hands. But how far is too far when seeking justice for the most heinous of crimes? The tragic case of Jamila Smith. This is the moment a grieving father confronted the man who murdered his baby daughter in a U.S. courtroom. But how did things escalate to this point? Let's take a closer look at the tragic events leading up to this encounter. 3-year-old Jamila Smith's laughter would never echo through the halls again. In September 2014, her bright light tragically dimmed. It all began when her mother, Jasmine Gordon, and her boyfriend, Clifford Thomas, rushed Jamila to the hospital in a desperate attempt to save her life. Unfortunately, it was already too late. The little girl had stopped. Jasmine and Clifford's explanation was heartbreaking yet confusing. They claimed Jamila had bumped her head and then slipped into unconsciousness. However, a closer look by medical professionals revealed a much darker truth. Jamila's tiny body bore the unmistakable signs of physical abuse. Marred her head and chest. These weren't just ordinary bumps. A closer examination revealed abrasions on her right arm, healing marks on her forehead, chest, upper back, and even her lower back. As if these external injuries weren't enough, the autopsy unveiled a horrific scene inside Jamila. Internal plagued her head and even her. A torn in a little girl? The answer was unthinkable. Grief-stricken and desperate for answers, Dwayne Smith, Jamila's father, confronted Jasmine. Her response, as Dwayne later recounted, was a chilling dismissal. Look at the police report. She ran into a wall. This heart-wrenching exchange only deepened the mystery surrounding Jamila's. Thankfully, experts were able to piece together the tragic puzzle. An investigation determined that Jamila's was no accident. It was a. The blame fell squarely on Clifford Thomas, who was babysitting Jamila on the fateful day. However, both Jasmine and Thomas were arrested and charged with involuntary manslaughter. The weight of this revelation shattered Dwayne. Weeks before Jamila's, he noticed a disturbing sight. His daughter was limping with a bruise on her leg after Jasmine dropped her off. Jasmine's explanation of a simple rash did little to ease his concern. Determined to protect his daughter, Dwayne contacted Child Protective Services, but his pleas for help seemingly went unanswered. Now, faced with the devastating loss of his precious Jamila and the horrifying truth behind her, Dwayne's world had crumbled. The courtroom awaited, and with it, a chance for justice for his little girl. The wheels of justice turned slowly, but for Dwayne Smith, they couldn't turn fast enough. Separate trials found both Jasmine Gordon and Clifford Thomas guilty of involuntary manslaughter in Jamila's. However, in a bid to spare victims from reliving the trauma of testifying multiple times, the court scheduled their sentencing for the same day. Dwayne Smith, one of the victims set to address the couple in court, decided to take a different approach. Instead of voicing his frustrations verbally, he chose to physically attack Thomas. A video captured from inside the courtroom shows the intense moment when Smith, unable to contain his anger, Thomas was sitting at the time, facing the judge and dressed in a yellow jail uniform. The sudden assault led to a chaotic scene as a fight broke out between the two men, prompting sheriff's deputies to intervene and separate them. Following the altercation, Smith was escorted out of the courtroom, and the judge ordered a recess to allow tempers to cool and restore order. After a tense wait, the court reconvened. Duane was not allowed back in, but the judge, with a heavy heart, decided against holding him in contempt of court. The gravity of the situation, the raw emotions unleashed by unimaginable loss, seemed to outweigh the outburst. Duane may have broken the rules, but the judge perhaps recognized a different kind of justice, a father's desperate cry for his stolen daughter. With a semblance of order restored, the sentencing proceeded. Jasmine, facing her own demons, received a sentence of 7 to 15 years for involuntary manslaughter. The additional charge of child abuse, where she was deemed an accomplice, tacked on another 14 to 25 years to be served concurrently. Thomas, for his role in the tragedy, was sentenced to 6 to 15 years for involuntary manslaughter. An additional charge of resisting arrest, stemming from a prior incident, added 1 to 2 years to his sentence. As the sentences were handed down, a heavy silence descended upon the courtroom. Justice, of a sort, had been served. But for Duane and the countless others whose lives were forever altered by Jamila, the true price remained far too high. Raymond Frolander. In 2014, a dramatic story involving 18-year-old Raymond Frolander captured the attention of people worldwide. The young man faced the consequences of his actions when the father of a child he was involved in an inappropriate act with intervened to protect his son. The father took matters into his own hands and physically confronted Frolander, resulting in a situation that escalated quickly. The father, who bravely called 911 himself, described how he used his foot and fists to defend his child against Frolander. When law enforcement arrived at the scene, they discovered Frolander lying motionless in the living room, bearing visible injuries on his face from the mouth. Despite the severity of the altercation, the father was not charged for his actions against Frolander. He later expressed that he was prepared to go even further to protect his child, but refrained from doing so thanks to his son's intervention. On the other hand, Frolander faced serious legal consequences for his actions, as he was charged with battery on a child under 12 and was held in custody without bail. His mugshot displayed the physical aftermath of the altercation, showing a battered and bruised face with visible swelling. The next year, Frolander faced accusations of lewd and inappropriate behavior towards a child under 12. In court, the tall and gaunt Frolander, dressed in an orange jumpsuit, respectfully responded to the judge's questions with a polite, "Yes, ma'am." Judge Leah Case then delivered a sentence of 25 years, with additional stipulations. Upon his eventual release, Frolander would be labeled sexual predator, placed on offender probation, and monitored electronically for life. Despite the gravity of his punishment, Frolander remained stoic, showing no visible reaction to the prospect of spending the next 25 years behind bars. During the court proceedings, the victim's father, accompanied by the grandmother and other supporters, observed the trial but chose not to speak. After the hearing, the father spoke briefly to reporters outside the courtroom, indicating that Frolander would have plenty of time to understand why he had been spared. Inmate attack, accused baby killer. In December of 2022, a tense scene unfolded inside the Merced County Superior Court. Just a few moments prior, the courthouse had been a place where justice was supposed to be served. Now, it was the surprising backdrop for an attack on a young man accused of a terrible crime. But before we delve into the courtroom chaos, let's rewind to the events that led to this dramatic confrontation. The story begins on a quiet afternoon on November 9th, 2022. A young mother was enjoying a stroll with her 9-month-old baby, Darius. A male friend accompanied them. Suddenly, their peaceful walk shattered. A burgundy Chevrolet Trailblazer pulled up unexpectedly, drawing their attention. Before they could react, the car lurched to a stop, and the unthinkable happened. Gunshots erupted, shattering the calm of the day. In the chaos, baby Darius by at least one bullet. Despite all efforts, was extinguished far too soon. Darius wasn't the intended target, a cruel twist of fate in this senseless act of violence. Investigators with the Merced Police Department believed the hail of bullets was meant for the mother's male friend, not the innocent child he was walking with. Wasting no time, detectives descended on the scene. Their keen eyes scanned the area, searching for any clues that could lead them to the perpetrators. They meticulously combed through nearby video surveillance footage, hoping to capture an image of the getaway car. Their diligence paid off. The suspected vehicle, a burgundy Chevrolet Trailblazer, materialized on the screens. With renewed determination, they tracked down the car and apprehended a 17-year-old boy, believed to be the driver in this horrific drive-by. The investigation stretched its web further. Following leads and utilizing every resource at their disposal, detectives discovered the alleged was not in Merced. He was approximately 90 miles west, hiding out in Gilroy. Understanding the urgency of the situation, they reached out to their counterparts in Gilroy, specifically their highly trained SWAT team. Through collaborative efforts, they identified the shooter as 18-year-old Davin Mochwain. He was a known gang member. Mochwain was taken into custody and booked into the county jail and faced serious charges, including attempt and gang enhancement charges. The December arraignment hearing for Davin Mochwain was supposed to be a standard court procedure. However, it turned into a chaotic scene that left everyone stunned. As Mochwain stood before the judge, facing the gravity of the accusations against him, an unexpected eruption of violence shattered the courtroom's decorum. Suddenly, another inmate, James McRae, lunged at Mochwain. Despite being handcuffed, McRae managed to strike Mochwain in the back of the head. The courtroom erupted in shouts as a deputy sheriff swiftly reacted, tackling McRae to the ground. The urgency of the situation was evident as the deputy appeared to strike McRae once while restraining him. Other deputies rushed in to assist, ensuring the situation was brought under control. This turn of events left everyone shaken. Among those present were members of Darius's family, who had come for closure. While understandably shocked by the sudden outburst, they expressed a sense of grim satisfaction at the attack. The baby's mother, still grappling with her unimaginable loss, spoke out. She described a surge of anger upon seeing Mochwain in court, a feeling she called a blood boil. Adding another layer of complexity to the case, she revealed a personal connection to Mochwain. They had grown up together, even attending the same school. This prior acquaintance undoubtedly added a new dimension to her grief and the impact of the crime. Meanwhile, Mochwain would later attempt to defend himself in court, claiming that Darius was an accident. He maintained he never intended to harm the innocent baby. Christopher Elwell. Just moments after hearing his sentence for a 4-year-old girl, convicted offender Christopher Elwell was violently attacked in the back of the courtroom by another prisoner. The incident occurred after Elwell received a sentence of 7.5 to 15 years for the Josiah Davies, who was shackled and awaiting arraignment and a hearing on a probation violation, suddenly headbutted Elwell multiple times. The attack was so fierce that deputies had to intervene quickly to restrain Davies. A representative from the Stratford County Attorney's Office commented that the two men did not know each other. It seemed that something about Elwell's case triggered Davies' outburst. Consequently, Davies faced criminal charges for assault by a prisoner and assault by an inmate. Elwell's crime took place in Dover, New Hampshire, on June 24th and 25th, 2017. The 4-year-old victim had gone to a house where Elwell was staying. 2 other children, a 9-year-old and another 4-year-old girl, were also present. They later reported that Elwell had shown them videos of inappropriate acts. At first, Elwell denied the act, insisting he was innocent. But when the case went to court, he cracked and admitted that the allegations were true. This wasn't the only blow Elwell faced. He also pleaded guilty to a separate charge from 2008, which required him to be registered as a sex offender, a designation he'd failed to comply with. The victim's mother later expressed her deep fear that Elwell would never be cured of his predatory behavior and would harm more young girls in the future. She argued that the sentence wasn't harsh enough, that Elwell deserved far more time behind bars to protect the community. The judge, clearly conflicted, seemed to accept Elwell's plea bargain with a heavy heart. While this spared the young victim the trauma of reliving the assault through a trial, the judge acknowledged it was a difficult decision. There were strict conditions attached to Elwell's eventual release from prison. One crucial term: he would be absolutely forbidden from any unsupervised contact with minors. This was meant to be a fail-safe, a way to prevent him from children again. However, a shocking twist awaited Elwell behind bars. He ended up filing a lawsuit against the county for a sum of $70,000. The reason? Elwell claimed the county jail had failed to keep him safe from harm. Here's how he painted the picture. According to Elwell, jail officials had placed him in a special unit for his own protection. They were aware of the charges against him, and for his safety, they should have kept him away from other inmates. Elwell's lawsuit pointed a finger at the jail deputies specifically. He alleged that the inmate who had attacked him, Josiah Davies, had explicitly warned the deputies not to seat him next to Elwell. Davies knew the nature of Elwell's charges, and it seems he worried about potential violence. Despite this warning, Elwell claimed the deputies completely disregarded Davies' concerns and placed them right next to each other. This alleged negligence, according to Elwell, led to a brutal assault by Davies. The lawsuit detailed the devastating consequences Elwell suffered because of this attack and the subsequent media frenzy. He claimed to have endured physical injuries, the stress of protective custody, fear for his safety, and ongoing emotional trauma. The fate of Elwell's lawsuit and the substantial sum he sought remained to be decided. Only time would tell if the court would agree that Elwell had become the victim within the very system designed to hold him accountable. Subscribers, pick. In a shocking and controversial turn of events, images of a supposed child predator have surfaced, showcasing a stark contrast in demeanor. On the left, he is seen smiling broadly, seemingly oblivious to the gravity of his situation. On the right, however, he appears battered and bloodied, an unsettling sight that raises many questions about the circumstances leading to this transformation. These images have sparked a heated debate online, with opinions ranging from outright condemnation to disturbing support. Many are questioning the nature of justice in such cases and whether this man's treatment is justified or if it crosses a moral line. While some argue that predators deserve harsh consequences, others emphasize the importance of maintaining human rights and lawful procedures, regardless of the crime. As these images circulate, we are left to ponder, what led to this man's change in appearance? Are we witnessing the aftermath of vigilante justice, or is there another explanation? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Larry Nassar. This next case sheds light on a heartbreaking betrayal of trust that unfolded over decades. It delves into the shocking story of Larry Nassar, a man who held a position of power and authority as the National Medical Coordinator for USA Gymnastics since 1996. Larry Nassar, a trusted figure in the world of gymnastics, took advantage of his position to manipulate and exploit young female gymnasts under the guise of medical treatment. He would perform what he called intravaginal adjustments as a supposed remedy for their injuries, despite this practice being unconventional and inappropriate. Nassar's actions, which included not using gloves, failing to obtain consent, and using this treatment for non-related injuries, were a means for him to obtain patients. Many of the victims, including young girls and women, were misled by Nassar's facade of legitimate medical treatment. They trusted his explanations and did not question his behavior, even when he them in the presence of others. Nassar's manipulation was so effective that when allegations against him surfaced, he initially garnered sympathy and support from those who believed in his supposed good intentions. The magnitude of Nassar's abuse came to light as more and more survivors bravely came forward with their harrowing experiences. Gymnasts detailed instances of assault by Nassar in various settings, including his apartment, his office at Michigan State University, and gymnastics events, such as the Olympics. Shockingly, Nassar's depravity knew no bounds, with estimates indicating that he molested one victim more than 800 times. Despite the widespread nature of Nassar's abuse, many gymnasts remained silent due to fear of repercussions and the toxic institutional culture within United States gymnastics. The prioritization of the organization's reputation over the well-being of its athletes created a barrier for survivors to speak out against their abuser. Reports of Nassar's misconduct were repeatedly raised but dismissed or overlooked. Even when concerns were shared with coaches or law enforcement, they were often disregarded. The intersections of sports, education, and law enforcement failed the victims of Nassar's abuse. Early investigations and inquiries into his actions were marred by negligence and delays, allowing Nassar to continue his behavior unchecked. The pivotal moment came in 2016 when media outlets began publishing accounts of Nassar's abuse, triggering a cascade of testimonies from survivors. Nassar's reign of terror finally came to an end with his arrest on child charges. Subsequent investigations uncovered a trove of disturbing evidence, including over 37,000 images of child on his hard drives. In July 2017, facing overwhelming evidence of his crimes, Larry Nassar pled guilty to multiple charges related to child. In January of 2018, a tense silence hung heavy in the Ingham County courtroom. For years, the voices of Nassar's victims had been ignored or dismissed. But here, in this moment, they finally had a chance to be heard. Over the course of 7 emotional days, 156 women bravely stepped forward to deliver victim impact statements. Through tearful testimonies, they painted a heart-wrenching portrait of the abuse they endured and the lasting impact it had on their lives. One such victim was Lauren Margraves, daughter of Randall Margraves. Lauren recounted the devastating betrayal she experienced at the hands of Nassar, who began abusing her when she was just a young girl of 13. Her life, she testified, had become a constant struggle ever since. Lauren's sister Madison also spoke out, revealing that she too had been a victim of Nassar's predatory actions. As if this wasn't enough to shatter the stoicism of the courtroom, another of Margraves's daughter, who had chosen to remain anonymous, was also revealed to be a survivor. The raw pain and anger emanating from the Margraves family was palpable. It reached a boiling point when Randall Margraves, the father of the victims, stood before the judge and requested for 5 minutes alone in a locked room with the man who had shattered the lives of his daughters. The courtroom held its breath. Judge Cunningham's response was a firm no. Margraves, however, pleaded again, this time for a single minute. The judge stood firm in her refusal. This denial sent Margraves over the edge. He lunged towards Nassar, only to be intercepted by a swarm of law enforcement officers who wrestled him to the ground. The once dignified courtroom erupted into chaos as Margraves, a man consumed by a desperate thirst for justice, thrashed against his restraints. He was hauled out of the courtroom in handcuffs, leaving behind a stunned silence. Later, in a separate hearing, Judge Cunningham acknowledged the outburst, but made a surprising decision. There would be no punishment for Margraves's attempted attack. She recognized the unimaginable pain that had driven him to such a desperate act. While Randall Margraves did apologize for his actions, one thing remained crystal clear. He yearned for nothing less than the absolute worst punishment for Nassar. In the end, justice was served. though not in the way Randall Margraves had envisioned. Nassar was sentenced to a lengthy prison term, 40 to 175 years, effectively guaranteeing he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. This case, however, was far from over. In the years that followed, the number of Nassar's victims grew exponentially. Ultimately, a total of over 500 women came forward, each with their own harrowing story of their courage in speaking out not only brought Nassar to justice, but also served as a beacon of hope for countless survivors around the world. Rita's Raid. Jeffrey Dahmer is one of the most notorious serial killers in American history. In 1991, the nation watched in horrified fascination as details of his monstrous crimes unfolded in court. Dahmer stood accused of murdering 17 boys and men over a 10-year period. While the sheer number of victims was staggering, what truly sent shivers down spines was the age range. These young men, filled with hopes and dreams for the future, were all brutally cut down before they even reached adulthood, their ages ranging from 14 to 33. The trial itself was an agonizing ordeal for the families of the victims. Day after day, they sat in the courtroom, forced to confront the monster who had stolen their loved ones in the most unimaginable way. Many succumbed to the crushing weight of grief, their tears flowing freely as they recounted the vibrant lives cut short. But amidst the sea of sorrow, one woman stood out. Her name was Rita Isbell, and her brother had been a victim of Dahmer. As she approached the stand, her voice initially steady, but it held a tremor of barely contained emotion. But with each passing word, the carefully constructed dam of composure began to crack. The injustice and the searing pain of loss all came flooding to the surface. Her voice rose, gaining in volume and raw emotion until it morphed into a heart-wrenching yell that echoed through the sterile confines of the courtroom. Sheriff's deputies, anticipating an outburst, surged forward. Before Isbell could completely lose herself in the torrent of grief and rage, they grabbed her, pulling her away from the stand, away from Dahmer. As they dragged her from the courtroom, she continued to unleash a torrent of obscenities. To understand why Isbell acted with such raw emotion in the courtroom, we need to look back at the horrific events that stole her brother, Errol Lindsay. Errol Lindsay, Rita Isbell's younger brother, was just 14 years old when his life was tragically cut short. In a chance encounter at a Wisconsin mall, Errol met Jeffrey Dahmer. What Errol likely saw as a harmless opportunity, a chance to earn some extra cash, turned into a nightmare. Dahmer, a master manipulator, lured Errol to his apartment with the promise of a significant sum of money in exchange for nude photos. Errol, trusting and unsuspecting, agreed. Once inside Dahmer's apartment, the facade crumbled, Dahmer rendering him unconscious. It was in this defenseless state that Errol suffered a horrific fate. Dahmer hole in his a barbaric attempt to create a submissive zombie-like state. But Errol, unlike others who had fallen victim to Dahmer, wasn't finished fighting. He began to stir. Faced with an unexpected complication, Dahmer doubled down on his depravity. Errol a second time, snuffing out the last embers of his struggle. What followed was the dismemberment of Errol's body, a final act of cruelty in a string of horrific events. During the trial, Dahmer, in a chilling display of detachment, admitted to his crimes. He spoke of murder, necrophilia, and dismemberment, with a practiced coldness that left the courtroom in stunned silence. Ultimately, Dahmer was sentenced to life in prison for each of his murders, a total of 15 consecutive life sentences. In 1992, he was sent to a high-security prison in Wisconsin, a place meant to keep him away from society and hopefully to ensure he wouldn't harm anyone else. For Rita Isbell, the trial offered a small measure of justice, but it couldn't erase the gaping hole left by her brother's absence. In the years that followed, she received a series of phone calls, each one more unsettling than the last. The callers, men claiming to be inmates at the same prison as Dahmer, offered hollow condolences before making chilling promises. They assured Isbell that Dahmer would be taken care of. The final call was the most unsettling of them all. The caller, a stranger cloaked in anonymity, spoke with a disturbing certainty. "You don't know me," he said according to Isbell's account to the media. "I'm up here with Jeffrey Dahmer. Don't worry, we'll take care of it." And then, as if on a preordained script, news broke 6 months later that Dahmer had been killed by another inmate. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.